Today, I'm going to talk about road surfacing in Iowa City and discuss the various materials that have been used to make our streets able to stand up to the vehicles that traverse them. On the top left here, we see the dirt roads. I don't know if any of you have ever been stuck in a dirt road, but I remember about 15 years ago I was. It's one of these level B roads that are not maintained, and it was in the wintertime, and it got greasy, and I called my friend. He says, all you can do is leave it there, come on back in the morning after it's frozen and drive out, which is exactly what I did, so that worked. And then moving down to the next picture here, we're going to talk about macadamized roads and macadam. Some of you have heard the term and perhaps know it in different ways. My father-in-law used to refer to macadamized, which was really asphalt, so it's a different kind of a material. And then moving further to the right, where we see the wagon and horses, we're going to talk about the placement of brick streets in Iowa City. And then right down below that, a tiny little print, it says bitolithic pavement. That was another type of road surfacing that we used in Iowa City. And finally, to the bottom left, concrete, which of course is, along with asphalt, the major way that we do things today. Well, Iowa City was founded as a new city in 1839 to be the new capital of the territory of Iowa. It replaced Burlington in order to bring the capital city closer to the center of the territory. And of course, it wasn't too many years after that that it moved to Des Moines because Iowa kept expanding. And when Iowa City was platted, a survey started where I show the arrow at the corner of Capitol Square, the southeast corner. And from there, they laid out a grid of streets, east, west, north, south streets. That's why they all have that nice straight grid in the downtown area. Well, today we enjoy driving on concrete and asphalt streets, of course, and on our interstate highways. This is Rochester Road in Iowa City, I believe, or at least the Rochester Road east of Iowa City, but conditions with the old Model Ts and different early automobiles were not so good. So in early days, streets were just dirt, and drivers and carriages often faced some compromising situations. Road scrapers were available to repair ruts in dirt roadways. They could be pulled by teams of horses, but it was a pretty difficult task. Narrow wagon wheels and horses that ran over dirt roads also made it hard to keep them flat. And in some communities, they even minimized the width of wheels that could be used. Later it was found that by applying oil to a dirt road would coat it such as the rain would not soak in, but instead would run off or pool until it would evaporate. So we dealt with dirt roads the best we could. On this early Iowa City map, we can see that a number of roads leading out of town were in existence. One of them followed the famed Dillon's Furrow, which created a pathway along which a military road was established between Iowa City and Dubuque. That's today's Highway 1. Other roadways led to Bloomington, which was later renamed Muscatine, went out to Williamsburg, and to other destinations. In November of 1922, 10,000 people reportedly had driven to Iowa City for the Iowa-Minnesota football game. In those days, it wasn't Kinnick Stadium. It was down by the English Philosophy Building along the river. Well, heavy rains fell during the game. The dirt roads in all directions became virtual quagmires. About 1,000 cars were stalled between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City and on other roads leading out of town. Some people who were stuck close to the interurban tracks abandoned their cars and took trains back home. Over the next couple of days, farmers with teams of horses pulled cars out of the mud, and they charged between $2 and $10 to do that. One person was reported to have made $90 in 2 hours. Cars were loaded on flat cars even and taken to Cedar Rapids or Iowa City on the Klondike. Well, 2 years before the founding of Iowa City, so we're talking about 1837, the 620-mile National Road was built. Its surface was covered with a substance known as macadam. So what is macadam? Macadam was named for the Scottish inventor John Macadam, who developed a process of using crushed rock on roadways. And of course, that represented quite an improvement over dirt surfaces. In forming a macadamized surface, some dirt was first removed from a roadway, and then a roller rolled the ground down to very hard, smooth surface. And next, about 6 or 8 inches of crushed stone was put down, and the roller went over that. And finally, a second layer of stone was applied and rolled, resulting in the finished roadway. You can see men there who are crushing rocks along the roadside. Very tedious process. It'd be quite a while before macadam came to Iowa City. But in the mid-1870s, Jacob Ricord, or however it's pronounced, Ricord, became the mayor of Iowa City. And he decided that the business district would benefit from something better than dirt roads. And of course it would. Therefore, he decided to have the downtown area rocked. A process of macadamizing was probably used as I've just described it. But this proved to be a costly move, and it brought criticism to the mayor from the taxpayers. However, later they began to appreciate their macadam business district. It's unclear just which streets were macadamized during Mayor Ricord's tenure. Well, macadam was not the perfect solution, as we shall find out later, but it was a big improvement over dirt streets. In 1892, a plea in the newspapers came out, "Therefore pave." It was argued that macadam afforded excellent drainage, and more applications to the city streets would mean fewer wet cellars. Other articles appeared in the newspaper speaking of a need for repair of macadam road surfaces. They were dusty, and during heavy rains they could be washed out and rendered impassable. Also, they became rough with use and had to be re-rolled. Well, in 1902, a Welsh inventor, Edgar Schulein, patented a road surfacing material that took macadam one step further. He combined macadam with tar and sand and called it Tarmacadam. The term Tarmac is a shortened term for Tarmacadam. We've all heard this term. It's often used to describe airport aprons, regardless of their surfaces, but technically this is what tarmac is. So anyway, making macadam was a tedious process, with the 1900 newspaper declaring, quote, "Quite a large force of men have been busy during the last week cracking stone," unquote, to repair the macadam streets. Also in 1900, rains washed out the macadam on the hill of Center Street in town, leaving the road to the cemeteries almost impassable. In 1901, the College Street macadam was in need of repair, and it was recognized that brick paving must come eventually. But property owners petitioned that there not be brick paving done on College Street, preferring not to be assessed for such an improvement. When streets were macadamized, the adjacent property owners were assessed special taxes to cover some or even most of the costs. A newspaper article related in 1902, quote, "When a man gets one or more of these special taxes added to his payments, he may be excused for feeling as though he had bunions when he walks down to the treasurer's office to get his receipt," unquote. Another problem was realized in 1908, when the rubber tires on automobiles were believed to ruin macadam roads. So we went through a lot of troubles, but we certainly got something better than dirt. Sources tell us that in 1895, paving brick was first applied to an Iowa City street. The street was Clinton Street, and the 2-block stretch from Washington Street to Jefferson Street was bricked. And you know, that's the area that runs right by the Pentecrest. A sand and gravel base was applied and rolled before the intensive work of laying brick took place. Imagine all the labor for all those bricks. Now, paving brick differs from building bricks. There were no paving brick makers in Iowa City that I could identify. But we had several notable building brick makers in town, including the very first one, Sylvanus Johnson, and then not long after, Nicholas Oakes, and then also Michael Goss and Chris Golicher. Paving bricks are extremely hard and durable. When made, they're heated to the point of what's called vitrification, which turns them almost into a glass. Nearby us here in Iowa was the largest paving brick manufacturer in the world, the Purington Brick Company in East Galesburg, Illinois. They employed 800 workers, and they turned out 150,000 bricks per day. They shipped bricks all over the world. It was recognized that brick paving was more costly than macadam, but in the long run, it may have been more economical. Well, 4 years later, in 1899, the brickwork on another portion of Clinton Street was actually redone. The brick was removed, the roadway regraded, and then a 6-inch concrete foundation was poured. This was followed by a 2 1/2-inch sand cushion, and then the relaying of the brick. One might ask, and I cannot answer this, well, why wasn't concrete by itself used? In 1899, an Iowa City newspaper declared, quote, "We have a bad roadway to the cemeteries. We need to pave or macadamize a roadway to the cemeteries." Well, the city council often mandated the installation of brick surfaces. In time, brick surface streets would become the norm in Iowa City. And the brick used was largely the Purington paving brick and what was called Purington paving block. The Purington Company was recognized by authorities as a superior product. In 1904, part of the Washington Street macadam was plowed up in preparation for its replacement by brick pavers. And in that same year, 3 men formally protested against the laying of a cement foundation for brick paving on Washington Street, declaring that the macadam base would be satisfactory and much cheaper. Now, in 1905, another road surface material was used, and this was the one that was called bitolithic. Bitolithic. Bitolithic is bitumen and crushed stone. And bitumen is also called asphalt. We know about asphalt. So bitumen was mixed with crushed granite and delivered to the paving crew at a temperature of about 800 degrees. And after spreading it, it was rolled and re-rolled with a steamroller, and it hardened very quickly. In June of 1905, the city entered into a contract for the paving of Iowa Avenue with, quote, Warren's Bitolithic pavement, unquote, and the pavement was applied in 1905 or 1906. By early 1908, the city had 1.5 miles of macadamized streets. In 1907, 16 blocks had been paved with brick, and another 14 to be done in 1908. At first, sand was used as a filler between the bricks, but in late 1908, the city authorized the use of asphalt filler on the brick paving on Church Street. The asphalt was considered better. An answer to the cry for paved roads to the cemeteries came in 1907, when Lynn Street and Brown Street were paved, thus offering a mud-free route to the burial grounds. That would have included St. Joseph Cemetery and Oakland Cemetery. So although a lot of brick streets were installed in 1910, the city was working to approve bitolithic paving for a great many streets. In fact, the city council decided that if any paving at all were to be done on 32 blocks, it would be bitolithic paving. And the process called for applying a 5-inch base of what was termed Portland cement concrete, over which a 2-inch wearing surface of bitolithic was applied. Representatives from Muscatine visited our town to inspect the bitolithic that they had heard was excellent. Dubuque Street received that paving in 1912. The first streetcar track was laid in 1910, and the streetcar company was ordered by the city to pay for the value of the paving over which their cars ran. including the paving between the rails and the paving for 1 foot on either side of the track. Well, concrete was available in 1909 or earlier and was considered fully as durable as brick. Also, concrete cost about $1 per yard in 1909 versus $2 per yard for brick. An article declared, quote, "At this price, concrete is going to sweep the country during the next 10 years, end quote. The first concrete pavement in Iowa was apparently placed in Lamar's in western Iowa in 1904 and was in service until 1968. The Eddyville Cemetery Road was placed in 1909 and was still in service as of 2009. Many other pavements placed during the 1920s and 30s are still in service today. Well, increased use of concrete and asphaltic surfaces was seen by around 1920. Asphaltic surfaces gained popularity because they stood up under all traffic and weather conditions. Yet, in July of 1921, the city engineer was directed to prepare plans and specifications for macadamizing Garden Street. That's the street over here on the east side of town. Yet in July of 1921, the city engineer was directed, I just repeated myself. Okay, when in 1922, Muscatine Avenue was scheduled for paving from Court Street to the east city limit, 5 different options were mentioned. Paving brick laid on a 5-inch concrete base, or 2 inches of bitolithic pavement over a 5-inch concrete base, or standard sheet asphalt laid on a 5-inch concrete base, or 1 course of reinforced concrete paving, or finally, vibrolithic paving. If we turn the clock ahead to today, we would see only asphalt or concrete as the choices for paving our streets. Well, what's vibrolithic? Vibrolithic paving is concrete paving that differs from other concrete paving only by the method used in finishing. The paving was finished by vibrating the surface, and it thereby created a denser pavement. Well, they routinely do that with a lot of concrete today, but not when they lay the streets with those fancy machines. In 1922, 55 blocks of streets were specified for paving with one of those 5 materials that I mentioned, quote, "as may be determined." Brick paving was still in vogue in 1922 when a portion of Washington Street was repaved by reusing the bricks already in place. And they used an asphalt filter to bind the bricks. In 1930, brick was still used for paving when 3-inch brick was applied to Dubuque Street between Iowa Avenue and College Street. Even as late as 1937, brick was used when paving Madison Street between Market and Davenport Streets. Certain streets in Iowa City were gravelled or cindered, particularly those in East Iowa City, near where you are, Michelle, in your area. Prior to that, those streets were just dirt streets. As late as the late 1940s, some of them still were dirt. East Iowa City, by the way, was a rural subdivision of Iowa City that was founded in 1900 in conjunction with the establishment of a large jewelry factory on Friendship Street. East Iowa City was not connected to Iowa City until 1910, when the voters agreed to expand the city limits to become twice as large as it had been. In 1948, crushed rock and oil was used on approximately 22 sections of unsurfaced streets in order to cover practically all of the extreme eastern portion of the city. This is a picture of the new bituminous oil distributor that was delivered to Iowa City in 1948. It was used to spread oil surface, to make an oil surface on gravel streets, even on dirt streets. Well, by the early 1950s, Paving in Iowa City was usually done with concrete. The standard thickness was 6 inches for most city non-arterial streets at that time. We'll find that it gets a little thicker when I talk in a bit here, but 6 inches was the thickness. In December of 1958, the city of Iowa City undertook a survey along most of the unpaved streets to determine if property owners wished to have their streets paved. In a letter involved with the survey, the city explained that the city council had the authority to order paving without a petition, but it had been customary not to install paving if more than half of the property owners objected. And a great many streets in town remained unpaved, including almost all of them that were in East Iowa City. These unpaved streets were probably surfaced with gravel or cinders. By the mid-1960s, most or all of the streets in East Iowa City were paved. Again, when paving was done, property owners paid most of the costs of the projects through special assessments, just like today when we do sidewalks sometimes in new areas or areas where the neighborhoods have been established, or if you have to replace your sidewalks. In 1958, an ambitious concrete paving program was carried out in Iowa City. 5 miles. In 1960, a large number of streets were paved using 6 inches of what was described as plain concrete. Here are the streets that were paved in 1960 to give you a little idea, including Prairie du Chien Road, Templin, Union Place, Rochester Avenue, Clark Street, Maggard, Fifth Avenue, Kirkwood Avenue, Fifth Avenue, Jackson, a lot of East Side streets. Again, Jefferson Street, Governor. So big project in 1960. Throughout the 1960s, a very large number of streets were paved, and by then 7 inches of concrete was used rather than the standard 6 used previously. And since paving projects were mostly funded by assessments to property owners, there would sometimes be complaints that the assessments were too high. Sometimes lawsuits even resulted. On the other hand, when new areas of town were developed, paving costs were absorbed by the developers and passed along to buyers as part of the purchase price of a lot or a lot house package. A major street improvement project was outlined in early 1970, calling for the widening of Burlington Street from Gilbert to Summit, the widening of West Benton Street, and some other work. Concrete and asphalt were both used for various parts of the project. State law required that when more than 75% of the affected property owners objected to the project, which they did on Benton Street, then unanimous council approval was required to go ahead with the project. And there was not unanimous approval by the council. In 1973, affected property owners along Rochester Street between First Avenue and Scott Boulevard rejected the proposal to widen it to 4 lanes, with the council again falling short of a unanimous decision to override the property owners. In 1977, plans were made to build Mormon-Trek Boulevard from Benton Street to the South City limit as a 4-lane concrete street. Up until then, it was just a gravel road, so some of you probably remember that. And a little pat on the back for Iowa City. In 1978, the Iowa Concrete Paving Association awarded Metro Pavers of Iowa City, quote, best constructed Portland cement paving project, unquote, in the urban and federal aid to urban systems category for their 1977 concrete project on Muscatine Avenue between First Avenue and Scott Boulevard. Projects were rated on smoothness, quality control, general appearance and condition, contractors management, job prosecution and progress, safety and complexity. So what to do with the many bricks that were removed from the brick streets and stockpiled? This is a 1979 article by Irving Weber that described an inventory of Purington paving bricks found at the Iowa City Service Center on South Riverside Drive. They found an estimated 175,000 bricks, About 50,000 of them were sold for 15 cents apiece. Later, small batches were sold for as little as 3 cents each. People were using them for their patios and driveways and in other applications. In 2010, a one-block section of Bowery Street, many of you have been on this, between Summit Street and Clark Street, underwent a brick repair project. The property owners along this stretch probably received an assessment to help cover the cost, but I don't know. Such projects were perhaps double or triple the cost of paving and concrete or asphalt. In 2013, a section of Dewey Street, which is adjacent to Oakland Cemetery, was renovated in brick. Some of you remember in 2015, the brick road surface of the one-block section of East Harrison Street between Clinton and Dubuque was removed and paved with concrete. The brick street had reached the end of its life. The bricks that were removed were saved for repairing other brick streets in town that were still in decent condition. And finally, the most recent, I think, is in 2017, a section of Davenport Street received a brick reconstruction at considerable cost. In fact, it was reported to have carried nearly a $1 million price tag. Kind of hard to imagine. So, to end this rather short presentation, after the exclusive use of concrete and asphalt on city streets, about the only thing left for us to contend with is potholes. They present an ongoing challenge for maintenance crews after the ravages of freeze-thaw cycles in the wintertime. Modern road construction has reached a degree of sophistication that far surpasses what the former macadamized and brick streets offered. But nonetheless, we can still enjoy, if that's the word, a number of blocks of early 1900s brick streets that still exist, mainly in the north end of town. Here's Brown Street. Until there is sufficient breakdown of these streets, or if enough affected property owners petition the city for a change, these brick streets will remain. I think it's kind of nostalgic to venture down the length of Brown Street, for example, with all of its dips and rolls, providing for a kind of traffic calming without the use of speed humps. Well, thank you for listening to the presentation.